Well, hey, good afternoon, Christian home educators of Ohio. Greetings to you. My name is Bill Ihde, and I was privileged to be the first chairman of the board of directors of CHIA as we know it. That was some 30 years ago. I'm sorry I can't be with you this weekend, but in lieu of that, I was asked if I would greet you by webcam and perhaps just share and describe a little bit of what it was like to home educate in the 80s. Now, please indulge me because I have never done a webcam presentation before. As I pondered the past, the thing that came looming to me was that it was illegal to home educate in the 1980s. Something that we're not accustomed to today. Back in that day, if you wanted to home educate your children, the local superintendent had total authority to thumbs up or thumbs down you based on how he felt you qualified. Well, that did not sit well for a lot of parents. And in fact, what emerged was a number of Christian parents who civilly disobeyed that law. And they did so based on three large convictions. And let me spell those out for you. First, and I think foremost, was simply the biblical mandate that parents are responsible for training up their children in the way that they should go, that we must teach our children the fear of God, and that we must nurture and admonish our children in the Lord. That was probably predominant. Second to that was the First Amendment and constitutional right to exercise our religion freely based on our convictions. And then lastly was just the deplorable state of public education in America. Many of us remember 20 years prior to that, in 1962, an infamous U.S. Supreme Court decision where the justices, through a decision, a landmark decision, outlawed prayer and Bible reading in the public schools. That audacious and landmark decision was chronicled by historian David Barton, who took a deep and penetrating look at what was taking place back there, and he found something phenomenal. He found that immediately, within a month of the 1962 decision, that the academic achievement of American students, as well as the sense of morality which would govern them in the schools, were in a free fall. And it brought great alarm to the nation. You may remember in the 80s, President Ronald Reagan responded to that, this is some 20 years later, when he had commissioned an educational group to report on the status and the state of education in America. That report was entitled A Nation at Risk. And I wanted to just read a short quote to you of what he discovered about education in America in about 1984. This is President Ronald Reagan, and I quote, "The educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens the very future of our nation and its people. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war." Well, that's really worth thinking about, isn't it? And those three convictions of the biblical mandate, our constitutional rights, and the deplorable state of education was the driving force that brought home education into almost a revival-like fervor in the 80s. And it became a force to be reckoned with as the movement began to burgeon and hundreds and even thousands of families in Ohio began to exercise what they believed was their right to home educate their children. a few years went by in the 80s. The movement began to grow. Christian Home Educators of Ohio began to flourish in many ways as a resource center. And the Ohio legislature in 1988 finally granted us permission, after knocking on their door repeatedly, and granted the home educators permission to put an advisory committee together of 19 members. 5 of those members were home educators. The great majority were not, and were not necessarily for home education at the time. I was privileged to be a part of that committee with several other wonderful people that worked beside me. And we met monthly for an entire year and had spirited debate over the merits and the rights of home education in Ohio. After that year, it went up for vote. And interestingly, the day it was to go to vote, there was a huge snowstorm in Ohio. And many of those that opposed home education on that 19-member advisory committee were not able to get in for the vote. I view it as providential, because when the vote was cast, home education won the day in Ohio. And the Ohio legislature granted us a regulation which many of you are used to operating under to this day, some 20, 30 years later. A regulation that limited the authority of the local superintendent and provided some basic accountability for any parent that wanted to home educate in Ohio. So it was really kind of a wonderful day in 1989 when that regulation went into effect. And of course, isn't it ironic that 25 years later to the year, now the public school systems through the Ohio Board of Education now offer home education online to public school students. One, I believe, called Virtual Academy. And so what goes around comes around. They couldn't beat us, so in essence they have joined us and are propagating their own philosophy through the vehicle of home education. I find it ironic. Well, today we have now experienced our second generation of home educators. Perhaps as you're sitting there today and even exploring home education, you are of a second generation. It's a good thing, but things are different today. You have more freedom. You have enormous resources at your disposal, which we did not have 30 years ago. And while home education was under persecution 30 years ago, today it's a common household word, and in some quarters even considered a status symbol. So, as it's recognized in culture, I think we can rejoice in that. And I want to leave you with these words. Home education has proven itself, and I think it's destined to go on for many generations. Yuri Bronfenbrenner, a famous sociologist from Tufts University back in the 80s, had a kind of a rather famous quote that became popular, and that quote is this: that children role model the people they spend the most time with. Now, if you do some inductive reasoning on that, what it's telling us is that when you home educate your children, and you are the ones that are predominantly spending time with your children, there's going to be a discipleship relationship there where you can speak clearly into your children's lives. You can role model for your children what it means to be a Christian, the beauty of Christianity, the truths of Christ. These things can come through, and through this medium or this vehicle of home education, the hearts of the fathers truly can be joined to the hearts of their children, and in turn the hearts of the children back to the hearts of the fathers. So I would just urge you and leave you on this note that home education is a wonderful vehicle to disciple your children, particularly to Christ. I think some of the side benefits are wonderful academic achievement. If mom and dad, you find yourself to be good teachers and find good resources. And it's just a way to instill wonderful character into your children. So I wish you all well. Thank you for the few minutes you've given me. And enjoy the convention, enjoy the conference, use the resources, meet people, and stay envisioned with this. It's what the Lord is doing today. Thank you very much.